Oi, oi, it's your boy, the John Tuck, of inviting you to walk me to my truck. Jack Slack, it's the Jack Slack podcast, coming at you on Monday the 7th of February. Isn't the year flying by already? And we got some fights to talk about that happened over the weekend. Only the one card, the UFC card, Hemransson versus Strickland. We might as well start at the top because it was bad. The level of fighting wasn't bad, but the fight was not very entertaining. I'm sure there are people who are going to pull rank on me in the comments. I love when I'm on Reddit or whatever and I say that was a boring fight and people go, well, not if you understand striking. You're like, mate, I bet you learned it from my articles. But no, this was a hard watch. I think it was especially a hard watch because at no point did it get beyond the first level of engagement. You know, when you're talking about a fight, it's like someone establishes a weapon and then they use that weapon and they build off that weapon. And there is nothing to stop that. Well, I mean, normally the other fighter will stop them from doing this, but there's nothing to stop that fighter if he's having success with that one weapon from just using that one weapon over and over and over again. And normally it's the jab, but we could be talking about like the inside low kick or something like that. Something non-committal that typically exists to build off. That's your foot in the door or your finger in the stitching, and start wheedling away. Because you're not going to finish anyone with a jab. You're not going to finish anyone with an inside low kick, probably. With the exception of yes, you can load up a big power left straight. Yes, you can load up a big power inside low kick on the end of a combination or something like that. But you know what I'm talking about here. And Strickland established his jab in minute 3 of the fight. He'd worked out that it's landing. Jack Hermansson's overreacting to it and he can't deal with it. And then for the next 22 minutes, he did fucking nothing except that. There was some good work, actually. He had a nice little teep to the body with his left leg, the one he hit Orlando Sanchez with in his massive bubble gut. But the man threw about 4 right hands in the entire fight. And the fight just devolved into this Jack Hermansson lunging in with his head way off to the side on his right, trying to reach for Strickland. And what Strickland would do was he'd land his jab and then his right hand always went out. So he could be punching with it, but he wasn't. His right hand always stretched and reached to slap at Hermansson's return. And so he was putting himself in a position where he was never going to hit with his right hand because he was committing his right hand to flailing at an expected return from Hemransson the entire time. Especially, this is the thing. Sean Strickland, I've been watching his fights all week, not an interesting fighter. And he does all the nutty shit in the, what a crazy guy, he wants to kill someone in the octagon. He does that to make you forget that he's not a very interesting fighter. And the key here is going to be waiting long enough between this fight and his next one that people forget that he's not a very interesting fighter. But it keeps working because he's Chael Sonnen, not a very interesting fighter, managed to convince people he was by having the gift of the gab. But again, I said last week on the Boycast, I don't know how well it's working because Sean Strickland is the top story for MMA fighting every day. And the man's still only got less than 40,000 Twitter followers. Now, I know that some people have moved to Instagram and maybe I'm an old man for judging people by Twitter followers, but have a look at Habib's Twitter followers or Conor McGregor or, well, actually, no, more normal level fighters who are quite popular. The man's push does not seem to be translating into actual fans. But his wrestling looked good. Hermansson was trying to take him down, would push Strickland to the defense. Strickland kept good control of the head, worked well, as you expect from anyone working with Eric Nixick and the guys over there. It's just that his corner was saying now throw the right hand, and he just didn't. He poked him with 2 good right hands to the body. And it's bizarre because his whole boxing style is to keep his hands on his chest. We talked about this in the Boycast, but keep his hands on his chest like Marvin Hagler used to jab off his chest. But he'll punch and his elbows are always way out to the side. And when he throws his right hand, take a look at the slow-mo of those right hands to the body. Those are some of the funniest looking right hands I've ever seen. He surprises people with how hard he can pop with his jab and stuff. But man, he just cannot commit to trying to get a finish. And then afterwards, like he did a post-fight press conference where he's like, "Oh yeah, I had people telling me that I'm next in line for the title, so I wasn't going for it or whatever." Like, no, you fought exactly how you normally do. You just didn't get a finish. Meanwhile, Hemransson, like, I was not looking forward to this fight at all because Hemransson is, the moment that he starts to doubt that he can get the fight to the ground easily or that he can dominate the stand-up, his whole thing just falls apart. The man, his self-confidence has been shot so many times in recent history. And the really bad one that I always give as an example is the Jared Cannonier fight, where he'd had a previous fight, like his last fight before that, he'd been showing beautiful up and down offense with his hands and his feet, and he's mixing everything together beautifully. And then the moment that he's in with Cannonier and he doesn't feel comfortable trading punches, he's trying to do one takedown attempt around from 10 feet out. And it's not that the two things play off. This is the thing we always talk about with people like Frankie Edgar and well-rounded fighters like that, where you go, well, if his striking stops working, he'll simply use his wrestling. And if his wrestling stops working, he'll simply use his striking. And it's more the case that they both benefit from each other so much that as soon as one is taken away, the other looks awful. So I can't really talk about how it built through the rounds or anything like that, because after round one, it was the same over and over, but with less like urgency to get it to the ground, more like, oh, I'll lumber around on the feet for a while for Jack Hemransson. And the leg kicks, which we talked about on the Boycast, they were largely free. I mean, I pulled up Fight Metric, UFC stats, whatever it is. And we are always skeptical about their leg kick count because they had Pedro Munoz landing 30 leg kicks on Jose Aldo when Jose Aldo basically checked every meaningful kick in that fight. And I did watch Strickland check a couple of these, so this stat is actually off. But like they've got Hemransson throwing 54 low kicks and landing 51 of them. But I mean, it wasn't that high, but it was still quite high because Strickland's legs are so underneath him. Like I'm going to reiterate stuff from the Boycast again, but like his feet are under him. They're sort of like disconnected to his punching. He does so much of his punching leaning forwards and back, where almost everyone in the UFC or MMA generally, they pump a jab and they step in with it to get their weight in it, and they've learned to fight like that. Where Strickland is very much like his feet are moving around and his hands and upper body are moving around on top of it, but it does mean that he's standing like bolt upright with his legs straight most of the time. So if you just jab in and then throw the low kick, you can normally get him. And Uriah Hall hit him with like 5 out of 5, but didn't do much else. Like, just gave up on the strategy. Now, granted, he does come back on low kicks, which is an issue, but then like low kick and then duck into a clinch. It's if you're watching his fights and you're not making it a huge part of your strategy, then you've fucked up. But Hemransson was sort of just throwing them out there to tip tap the leg after Strickland checked a couple, and really didn't do much damage with it or build off it in any way. Well, I mean, this is what we said, like none of the fight was building off it in any way for either fighter. Very disappointing, but I didn't have high hopes for this fight anyway. I just don't like their styles, to be honest, either of them. Not to say they don't work, but they're just not my cup of tea. Segue into T-Sip. So, what else is on this card? Oh, actually, God, everything on the main card except Shavkat fucking sucked. Co-main event was Nick Maximov versus Punahele Soriano. Now, people were super mad about this. If you were watching this, you were probably, and you listened to the podcast, you were probably going, what an awful fight. Bet Jack Slack talks about it for like 10 minutes because he loves it. Because Nick Maximov was doing exactly what I said I would want Hemransson to do in the main event. What I said Coldwell did to Barzola. Pick up the high crotch, hit the crackdown, get the guy on his hip, make it so that he can't be explosive, turn the wrestling into sort of a scrambly positional thing. Well, not even scrambly, because like you're removing the guy's ability to move fast. Reiterate that what the crackdown is, you shoot the single with your head on the outside, you step back and circle away from them so that they come down with like the outside of their knee on the mat. And what they'll often do is like wrap over your head, often looking for the guillotine. And if you shrug your shoulders like Jake Shields, you can make them go for that and pretty much have no hope of getting it. Or Habib obviously did. And what you do like is you're then in this battle where they're trying to expose your back because you're on all fours inside their leg, and you're trying to walk back into their guard. So it's a takedown where you're almost past their guard, but you actually want to go back into their guard before you start passing. And Jake Shields was amazing at it. Nick Maximov is a student of Jake Shields and Nate Diaz. And it was so funny because Nate Diaz was there cheering on this guy who is like the most obvious example of the style that Nick Diaz and Nate Diaz always complain about. Literally threw no punches on the mat. Just took this guy down and held him. He was like Jake Shields if Jake Shields couldn't submit anyone. But then that's the Diaz thing in a nutshell, having complete cognitive dissonance. Saying things like, everyone's on steroids. Steroids are the worst. You should be banned forever if you use steroids. 4 members of the scrap pack, 3 of them have tested positive for banned substances. We'll allow Nick Diaz because that was marijuana and he just kept getting caught. But Jake Shields and Gilbert Melendez have also been caught for performance-enhancing substances. And they stand next to him at these press conferences while they're saying it. But anyway, Nick Maximov is shooting these, or picking up these short single legs. He's southpaw against an orthodox, so he's shooting like a left straight to the head. And then he's just reaching out with his lead hand and grabbing behind the leg and pulling it up. And people are going, oh, those single legs, terrible. But Chris Weidman has been doing that to elite level fighters forever. If you want to watch him do it to someone who just falls over like a baby penguin on ice with the sound effects and everything. Gegard Mousasi, a regional champion now, but back then he was getting murked by Chris Weidman until he cheated. And that one's going to make people actually angry. I'll step that back. He was, that first round, he was getting murked. But Maximov's shooting these head outside singles and cracking Soriano down. And Soriano's, he's going into the full splits, trying to, the box splits and trying to sprawl. Really weird. It reminded me a lot of BJ Penn versus Matt Hughes, where BJ Penn would sprawl out into a pigeon stretch or a pigeon pose. If you don't know that, look it up right now on Google Images. Yoga stretch with one leg across yourself and then you put your chest down to your leg. And that's how Penn ended up in that fight, with Hughes holding onto his leg. But this guy was doing it the other way. And it's quite interesting because I was watching an instructional by, is it Marvin Castile? He did an instructional on Fanatics, which is basic no-gi awareness or something like that. And it hit on something that was happening in this fight. When you're training with someone and they don't know how to sit back, so if you're doing a back take and you're sitting back, or if you're sitting back on an armbar or something like that, guys will put their, so if you're on your knees, if you pull your foot in towards your taint, you can sit back over it. But if you put your foot outwards, turning the knee outwards, and then you sit back over that with your foot out, you got a great chance of fucking up your knee. And I was watching it in the first round going, ooh, that's risky. And then in the third round, he did fuck up his knee doing it. And then he'd been fighting off the takedowns and getting up quite well. But the third round, he just couldn't because he blew out his own fucking knee doing this. If you watch the clip again, his knee is outside. Sorry, his foot is outside his hip, and he sits back. It's gnarly. You see guys hurt their knees also. If you watch any good half guard players, they'll reach under and they'll grab the shoelaces right down by the toes of the other leg in half guard, and guys will try and sprawl out, and because their foot is pulled up by the toes, right at the end of the lever to their to their taint, they'll sprawl and hurt their own knee. So yeah, I liked what Maximov was doing with the crackdowns and then converting the high crotches into doubles and shooting in on the high crotch and ducking under to the back and stuff like that. But then he'd get on the back and do fucking nothing. So I'll be watching his next fight and being like, yay, and nerding out over the crackdowns and shit. But I don't think many other people will. Okay, all right, that's enough negative shit. Let's do a positive one. Shavkat Rakhmonov. I didn't talk about him in the pre-fight, and I forgot to. And my main thoughts on him were, damn, he massive. Absolutely enormous. I think he's 6'1", and he's welterweight. And in his first fight in the UFC, he fought he fought Alex Oliveira in his first fight in the UFC, and guillotine choked him. But in his last fight, he fought Michel Prazeres, who is comically undersized in height for welterweight anyway. He's like Darren Wynn. It's like where you're going, why do you not just try and get down a further weight class? But they're so wide. They're like fantasy dwarfs. They can't get any thinner and can't get any lower weight. And Prazeres has since tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs or whatever, but girth-enhancing drugs, that's what he's on. But this one, Carlton Harris, was a much more similar stature opponent. And I thought he did all right. Came out early. If I have to say something about Rachmanov, his hands are flappy as fuck. When he hurt Oliveira, he just ran in swinging his hands like from his chest, vertical fist hooks, with the other hand dropping each time he throws a hook. He's very sort of like gets on top of himself and leaves his chin out there on a plate, which is not great if you're very tall, or much taller than your opponent, because the thing that they're going to do when you're swarming in on them is close their eyes, duck, and throw the overhand, and that's where, you get to see these tall guys starched for stepping in. Think of Stefan Struve, like always the moment that he had the opponent against the fence, rather than use his reach, he'd step in to throw like a right uppercut and get cracked over the head. But in this fight, he was looking measured. He had Harris circling around the fence. As Harris circled to Rachmanov's left, past Rachmanov's lead foot, Shavkat spins into a back kick, hits him in the body. Really good. One of the basic ways to land a back kick, works really well, always has done. Get the guy to the boundary so he can't back away from the kick. You make him choose one of two directions. Well, three. I mean, he can stay there, but he's going to go left or right. And if he goes left, you can back kick him. If you're orthodox, that is. Or right, if you're southpaw. Think Conor McGregor and his wheel kick. So that was nice, and it set up the knockout later. There was some interesting wrestling. You got a crash course in inside knee position. When you watched Shavkat, he got the double underhooks along the fence, pressed in on the body lock, and he put his left knee inside of Harris's feet, and then he pulled away from the fence and over that leg so that he could try and throw Harris to the ground or get on his back as he tried to balance. The classic DC2, as they call it at James Krause's gym, or the Habib throw. And it's quite interesting because when I was watching this, Harris managed to free his leg, hop over the leg, and circle around, and Rachmanov had to put him back on the fence again. And it reminded me of a fight I watched the other day in the UFC, can't remember who it was, where the guy, it was a good wrestler, and he had to do it 3 times. He kept having to circle around. He'd start the throw, miss the throw, and try and circle around and put the guy back on the fence to attempt the throw again. So when I was watching this and I was reminded of that, I just thought of, I can't remember who it was. It might have been Gary Tonin said it, but they were talking about like single leg X guard or ashigarami, the leg entanglement. And that was Marcelo Garcia's game back in the day as a grappler. It might have been Paul Schreiner saying this. And he was saying like when Marcelo started doing it, if you put someone in it, they would fall over. Whereas now, ADCC happened like over the weekend. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if you watch any good match, guys will get pulled into single leg X guard, and then they'll use their grips, stand on one leg, and start trying to pass, all while the guy's trying to off-balance them. Now it's a battle. And I think that's what you're seeing with this position too. Like, Rachmanov's good and strong, and he had a good position, but the other guy just had really good balance. He's obviously seen it a lot before. Guys aren't just going to fall over as soon as you try it anymore. But then they hit the mat. Rachmanov was like in top half guard or whatever, and as soon as they didn't settle, which was good from Harris. I was actually really impressed with Harris in this fight because I knew that Shavkat was good, but I thought that Harris was... Well, people were treating Harris as a dead duck, and I was quite pleasantly surprised by him. But as soon as he was able to, he shoved his right hand into Rachmanov's armpit, which is another Marcelo Garcia thing, but so useful. If you get your hand in someone's armpit from the bottom and you straighten your arm out, very hard for them to do much. They can, if they line everything up right, they can try and armbar you, but it's so tricky. You've made a chance to get to your butt and then to your hand and then to your feet or back to guard. And he was able to get to his feet off this. And then Harris put Rachmanov, Shavkat, whatever. Well, I think to say Shavkat now, actually. But Harris put Shavkat to the fence, and he had the double underhooks. And you saw, again, the importance of that inside knee position, because Shavkat wasn't letting him have anything. Shavkat, his leg, his right leg, was always pressed to the inside of Harris's. Harris kept trying to put the foot in so that he could do the same turning throw, and Shavkat just kept pushing it away with his own leg, or just tracking the leg so that it never got in between. So then Harris changes his tactic and he tries to step around the outside of that leg and like hit a little throw, a trip to the outside. And as soon as he changes direction, Shavkat goes, right, having that, and he hits the Uchimata throw on the inside of the thigh, which again requires inside knee position, and throws him over onto his head. It was great. But Harris gets up and then they're along the fence and Shavkat spins again. This time Harris crunches over, ready for the body kick, and he gets heel kicked in the head. And he was still conscious, but Shavkat got on top and punched him a few times. And obviously, it's quite hard. You know, we can go like, damn, he's got a great chin because he was still conscious after the wheel kick. But it's still, you would rather be defending from your back, not being wheel kicked in the head first. So he got pounded out. Yeah, impressive performance from Shavkat. Really liked it. I'd say like watch it again and keep in mind that inside knee position. And just watch those two exchanges along the fence when Shavkat's on offense and then when Shavkat's on defense and turns it into counter offense. And then I watched someone get mad on Reddit about people calling it an Uchimata because Shavkat's a wrestler, not a judoka, or a sambist, not a judoka. They're just like, it's just terminology. No one gives a shit. Half the things in wrestling, like, it's just largely because the Japanese really like a technical term for everything. Billy Robinson talked about this for a while. He was like, he'd teach some weird variation of a toe hold or some shit. And then the Japanese lads he was teaching would try and categorize it into, you go, no, it's just, I'm just grabbing the guy's foot and trying to toe hold him from here. If you look at judo terminology, it's always outside, inside, reverse, inverted, stuff like that. You know, gyaku, uchi, soto, all those prefixes for what it is. But Uchimata is pretty commonly known. But then Uchimata means two different things in two different martial arts. The Uchimata is an inside thigh kick in Kyokushin or Seido Keikan, full contact karate, because it literally does uchi inside mata thigh. And even then, like in different styles of karate, the blocking from outside to inside. So like think of you probably did it in Taekwondo or karate or something like that. But like bring your hand up behind you outside and then bring it in towards your chest. So you're blocking something inwards, a stepping straight punch because it's fucking karate. But like that in some is an inside block because it's coming inside. And in others, it's an outside block because it's coming from the outside. So it's soto in some and uchi in the other. But I think we're all familiar with the term Uchimata. So it doesn't need to be wizard kick. You don't need to get offended. But then I use the term hip throw, instead of saying like ogoshi or haraigoshi or whatever. It's just Uchimata's caught on. I think it's probably because it's the throw that can be used most readily in no-gi contexts from judo. If you watch Craig Jones, like when he's not sitting to his butt, a lot of the time he's trying to Uchimata people. Same with Gary Tonin. But anyway, let's move on. Brendan Allen versus Sam Alvey. Good for Brendan Allen. He managed not to lose this one. I said in the boycast that I know that he's a hot prospect, but I feel like I've only ever seen him lose. But coming off the loss to Chris Curtis, he came back against Sam Alvey. And, Alvey did what he always does, which is stand with his back foot on the fence and try and counter with the right hook when the guy comes in. And it worked in 2008 or whenever it was, 2010 when he arrived in the UFC. And then it quickly stopped working. And yeah, he still cracks guys with it from time to time, but they're not like lunging onto it as readily as they would back in the day. Allen got clipped with it here, but just got smashed with punches because he stands along the fence the entire time and is only looking for the counter right hand. I think he got caught with a left hook after he'd like thrown the right hand, but then got choked out by a rear naked choke. Second time, not in a row, but second time, or during this streak at least, that he's been choked with a rear naked choke without the hooks in. But it did mean that he couldn't protest to the judges or the refs, which is nice. I don't want to rub too much salt in the wounds of Sam Alvey. I just don't want to see him. Like, one, he's got a really boring style. He does the same thing over and over again, and clearly it's not working on like even low-level light heavyweights anymore. Two, he's weird about unions and people getting paid and will fight for almost nothing apparently. And three, like lots of better fighters have been cut while he stays just because he's been like outspoken against unionizing and says he'll fight for almost anything. Which is even weirder because like I'm looking at the Tapology picture of him right now. It's him weighing in when he spray tanned a sponsor on his chest, which is not very company man behavior. If you're aware that you still need the money for the sponsors to live, then maybe it isn't that great in the UFC and what they're doing isn't that great. But there was a good post. Someone cheekily put up reminder, Sam Alvey would still beat up 99% of MMA Twitter. And I was like, yeah, well, can he do that instead of being on UFC main cards, taking up, good spots? But then one of the replies was from... I'll give you a dramatic reading of the reply first, and then I'll tell you who it's by. Exactly. I really don't understand people who've never ventured inside of a cage being critical of the performance or effort of those who have. If you wouldn't say it to them inside an elevator, don't say it on social media. And you go, well done. Golf clap for that man. Who is that man? It's Josh Cohen, the guy with the pink jacket, who is literally only famous for being a dick to Conor McGregor and then trying to be a dick to Colby Covington and getting shut down. And also, fairly regularly getting dunked on by me on Twitter. He will just turn up and be like, well, actually, I was there because they asked me to be there to bring hype and juice the show. You're like, you got 6,000 followers, mate. No one knows who you are. I don't think I said that, actually. I said, I expect my Patreon subscribers will be going up this week then. And then he deleted his tweet and left. But yeah, I mean, imagine having that little self-awareness, being like, I can't believe these people talking shit about a pro fighter, when literally the only thing you've ever done that anyone remembers is talking shit about a pro fighter to their face. Trying to get in on the hype. I'm part of it now, But no, you are well within your rights to not enjoy Sam Alvey and be like, I'm happy for him to earn his living fighting. Could he do it on a card that I'm not going to watch, please? Okay, last of the bad fights from the main card. Brian Battle versus Treason Gore. Tresean Gore, sorry. Treason! Apparently this was a big rivalry from The Ultimate Fighter, but I didn't watch that series of The Ultimate Fighter because I don't watch any series of The Ultimate Fighter. It's shite. I do remember watching Brian Battle's fights there, though, because I think I had to preview him on the Tough finale, which I think was supposed to be between these two. But anyway, Tresean Gore, been out for a year with a knee injury. Talks mad shit. They're shouting at each other before the opening bell. Comes out round one, backs Battle up to the fence, gets kicked about 50 times while Battle's back is to the fence. Really insane. Just did nothing. Put the pressure on him, and then just stood there looking at him. It was like Edson Barboza versus Giga Chikadze. So Brian Battle lands 100 kicks in the first round. Then they get into awkward wrestling. Tresean Gore actually hit him with a couple of good punches that wobbled Battle's legs in the second round. It wasn't that bad, but it wasn't good. Meanwhile, the prelims were actually pretty good for this one. Let's go from the very first fight of the night. Malcolm Gordon versus Dennis Bondar. Malcolm Gordon, I can't remember how he ended up on the bottom, but he was in the bottom of the guard, throws up an armbar, starts talking on it, ends up on top. The commentators are going, he hasn't got it, and I'm going, ooh, still looks pretty nasty though, because the thing with an armbar or any sort of joint attack is that to get a perfect armbar, you have to straighten the guy's arm out dead to rights, and you've got him in an extremely precarious position where a little bit of pressure will hyperextend the elbow. But if he's wriggling and twisting and stuff, you're not going to get that perfect position. But you are still going to be, you've got his arm in a pretty compromised position throughout. And there's a lot of different things that can go wrong for him there. And that seems to be what happened here, because he came up into the clinch, and it looked like he wasn't really using that hand as he came up. And then Gordon tried to throw him with a Uchimata or a whizzer kick, and he put a hand down, and then the hand just collapsed at the elbow, and then he verbally tapped. Gordon got off him. Good shout for not punching him while he was verbally tapping before the ref got in. And then they showed the shot of Bondar with his elbow jutting out at a bizarre angle. So I think the consensus is that probably happened. If it didn't happen, I think it did happen in that scramble there. He put his hand down and his elbow broke. But I think it was probably damage done during him having that arm talked on. It's kind of like the Conor McGregor thing where, there isn't really a consensus about where that leg break came about, but he did kick some nasty checks just before that, earlier in the fight. And, it could be the situation where there is a microfracture and it stands up to you standing on it, but then you throw the kick again and it just gives out. It's like the Weidman Silva one. I was watching it with a friend and I said, because one of the points in the first fight was that Silva had been landing low kicks without any resistance, basically. And as soon as Weidman checked that first kick, I went, oh, that's a good check. And then the second check, his leg blew apart. I often think that, like, the first check, if it was good enough that I went, oh, that's a good check, probably put a dent in Silva's shin, did something to it. So Malcolm Gordon gets his verbal submission, bit of a weird one. I did like the attacking he was doing up to that point. Philip Rowe versus Jason Witt. Jason Witt, second guy on the card who just scored takedowns and did absolutely nothing with them. Didn't even throw a punch, which is, kind of, it defeats the point of getting the takedown. Obviously, you want to hold the guy down, but like, they're not supposed to score anything that you're not doing on the ground. So ultimately, you need to be able to wrestle in a way where you can free one hand at any given time. Think of Khabib sitting on the ankles and hammering away with one hand at all times. But they were talking all about Philip Rowe's work to make his jiu-jitsu better through this fight. And he did do well getting up, actually. But at no point did they mention that, like, his most recent appearance was a submission grappling exhibition against Gordon Ryan, the greatest grappler in the world. And it was a submission, it was an Iron Man match. So it was as many submissions as Gordon could get in the 15 minutes. And the reason they did it was because, like, Gordon was coming back from retirement. And he was fucking enormous. And I don't know why they picked Philip Rowe, but it was actually a really interesting moment before the matches. They did like a blog series. And I don't know why I watched it, because I never do this with like embedded stuff. But Philip Rowe turned up with a beatbox with like, decal on it, done with Gordon Ryan's dad on, Big Gordon, who died a couple of years ago. And Gordon Ryan always wears him on his rash guard and stuff. And it was quite interesting just to see Gordon Ryan be like, I'm not often speechless, but I don't actually have anything to say. And, it was just really cool that they had this exhibition match where they're just finding openings and trying to submit each other, but they're not trying to, like, blow each other's knees out. And, it doesn't go on anyone's record, but it was certainly interesting to watch. And obviously, Gordon Ryan dominated him. But got to be good experience for Philip Rowe. And I thought he gave a good account of himself then. And I didn't really know who he was. So, I wasn't that surprised when he did okay getting up and stopping Witt from doing anything on the bottom, when he was on the bottom, rather. But he hit him with a 2-3-2, right-hand lead. You got to be confident that you're long if you're going to try to throw a right-hand lead at a wrestler right off the bat. But he did. He chinned him, put him down, knocked him out. Really lovely finishing sequence. And again, the only thing I've seen of Philip Rowe up to this point is him giving Gordon Ryan a custom beatbox and him having that fun grappling match with Gordon Ryan. So now I'm going to go back, find out who this guy is. Did think his hair was weird. I was like, is that a weird birthmark on the back of his head? No, he'd shaved like a heart into his hair, but he'd left it like the same length as the hair on the top of his head. It was a weird look. Oh, here's a fun one. Jelton Almeida, who I'd been quite excited about debuting in the UFC. He was on the Contender Series. If you remember, I started covering the Contender Series, and like the first 2 episodes I saw of it were really fun. And I was like, these guys are great. You had Jack Della Maddalena, you had Jelton Almeida, the first light heavyweight I've ever been excited for. And they had loads of guys like that. And then after 2 weeks, and they weren't even like week 1 and week 2, I turned up at like week 4 and week 5. And then it was just downhill from there. But Jelton Almeida was a lot of fun against, was it Nasrudinov on the Contender Series. He fought from top, from bottom. He hit takedowns. He did some striking. But his grappling was just really solid. Go back and listen to that episode because I loved it. I think that was the very first boycast or the second boycast. But he fought Danilo Marquez here. Came out and threw a high kick at his face, which is in this instance, it's like a very long uppercut. If you throw an uppercut at someone, what they're going to do? Stand upright. So front kick to the face, immediate double leg, and immediately got the Dagestani handcuff, folded him down on that arm. Worth noting that Shinya Aoki was doing this long before Nurmagomedov turned up, but still a very powerful position and one that we much more associate with Khabib. But, you saw what happens if you can't do anything about it. You can't scoot your butt over the top of it and break the hands free. If you can't willingly turn your back and go to your knees, you are just stuck underneath, and the guy will put his foot in between your legs and go to 3/4 mount, which is like not as good as mount in grappling terms, but if you're allowed to punch the guy in the face, it is functionally exactly the same as mount, with the added bonus that he can't bridge. You only need to watch Damian Maia's passing against like Neil Magny. He goes quarter mount and then he postures up and throws a big elbow, and the guy will immediately cover their head, and then he drops down chest to chest and frees his leg, and he's in full mount. So Jailton Almeida gets his win by ground and pound. Looked great. Marquez complained. Nobody cares because you were getting punched and you weren't doing anything. Because you couldn't do anything. I didn't watch Alexis Davis versus Julija Stoliarenko, because why would I? Chidi Njokuani versus Marc-Andre Barriault. We were talking about Chidi Njokuani and Anthony Njokuani on the Boycast quite a lot. I said I couldn't get away from them. Who had just beaten Anthony? Oh, because Anthony just fought in Eagle FC. And then we were talking about Melvin Gillard having his fight pulled out from under him in Florida, which was unusual because Florida is, a desolate wasteland where anything's allowed. But then I said, remember, Melvin Gillard is a lightweight / welterweight occasionally. And he decided that he would fight the last portion of his career in MMA at middleweight. So you had Melvin Gillard versus Chidi Njokuani, which is a ridiculous size disparity. And then you had Melvin Gillard versus Israel Adesanya, the current best middleweight in the world. You're going, what the fuck are Melvin Gillard's management doing? What the fuck are Melvin Gillard's friends doing that they're letting him do this? But Chidi Njokuani, shout out to the booth because they referred to his fight against Gillard in Bellator as being on the regional scene. Love it. Lovely touch. And Chidi Njokuani came out through a couple of quick kicks. Both Anthony and Chidi come from, I think they worked with Tiger Schulman, but they came from like a American kickboxing style originally, like the Chuck Norris WCL, is it? World Combat League, but like Raymond Daniels, Stephen Thompson were part of that too. But like it's a style of kickboxing that isn't like Dutch or Muay Thai. And they have some really interesting ways that they use, like the step up inside low kick to step back into southpaw and land counter right hooks and things like that. Sadly, Anthony's fallen quite a long way. He's got like a 15-16 record now or something like that. But Chidi seems to be in sort of like his own little ascendancy. He just fell out of Bellator, but he came back through the Contender Series into the UFC. But he threw a couple of kicks at Marc-Andre Barriault, and Marc-Andre Barriault stepped up into an inside low kick of his own, and Chidi didn't move. He saw him coming, stood there, popped him with a 1-2 while he was on one leg, smoked him. I'm doing this work on Volkanovski at the moment, this Advanced Striking 2.0 Volkanovski, which is going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks. And a lot of that is focusing on like his use of footwork and sort of a game of footsie that basically revolves around the inside low kick. And he uses it in a way where like the inside low kick is slower than the step up inside low kick is slower than the right low kick. This is all talking orthodox, by the way. Because you have to step up first, and people think of it as like a longer technique, but it's not, because the length of the kick is determined by where the standing leg is. The closer you get the standing leg to the opponent, the longer the kick is, or the further the kick reaches, rather. So to make your lead leg kick longer than your rear leg kick would be, you have to step your back foot up past where your lead foot is. Which people often don't do. But anyway, you set up these expectations and these patterns, and you use that to make people move, which, if you watch Volkanovski versus Ortega, there's a lot of times in that fight where he just does the step up to chew up distance, or he steps up and then jabs instead. But if the guy stands still and hits you while you're stepping up, you have both feet directly underneath you and you're not in good balance. There are a couple where Volkanovski got jabbed with his feet together and fell backwards. And that's exactly what happened here. Barriault got on one leg, and Njokuani didn't give any ground, and he just capped him. Hakeem Dawodo versus Mike Trizano was fun. I always like Dawodo. He's got like good technical sort of Muay Thai style. 2-punch combinations, elbows, good low kicks, good high kicks, good cut kicks he used against, was it Julio Arce? If there is a problem with him, though, it's that like the commentators keep going on about how fast and powerful he is, but he's finished like one person in the last 5 years. If he could finish some people, he would be a star for them. But like, he loves going to close decisions. He's got like 3 split decisions in the UFC, 1 finish in the UFC, and then this decision, which was not very close, but was still like, at no point was he rocking Trizano's shit up. He was landing cleanly, but like it wasn't really doing anything. And he did look undersized in this fight as well. So, go to bantamweight, Dawodo. Get jacked and punch people harder. John Castaneda versus Miles Johns, I really enjoyed, actually. Castaneda, Sexy Mexi, what a great nickname. But, yeah, walked him down, used pressure really well. And what he had in Miles Johns was a guy who's going to swing big and fast. And so he was just popping him and moving his head and then popping him with short counters. He was doing a lot of right, straight, and dip. You know, we talk about the jab and dip a lot, where you jab and then you squat down in your stance so that the opponent throws back and then you come inside with a counter, or outside with a counter, rather. You can do that with the right straight, and a great example of this would be Aaron Pryor. He used to do this a lot because Aaron Pryor's style was very weird. People talk about how chaotic it was all the time. But he used to throw like a right-hand lead and then duck and then come up with a counter left hook after the opponent thrown back. And that's how Castaneda hurt Johns a couple of times in this fight. He'd poke him with the right-hand lead or the left-hand lead from southpaw, duck down into his stance, then come back with the lead hook. And Johns kept swinging so big that he'd get chinned while out of position. Like, he'd throw his whole head out there. The one that really hurt him caught him over the back of the head as he was basically turning his own back. And he did that thing where he reaches the back of his head and goes, "You hit me in the back of the head." But it was one of those ones that only hit him in the back of the head because he swung and turned his back. So knockdown, arm triangle choke. Johns did actually manage to get his hands around his leg, which normally kills that choke for me, at least. I'm shit at finishing when guys get their own leg. You know, I just try and make sure that I dismount slowly so that they don't have a chance to kick their own legs up and grab them. But yeah, no, he choked Johns out with the leg in and everything, and Johns just went flat. And that pleased me because Miles Johns got a $50,000 bonus for a knockout of the night against Kevin Natividad. Kevin Navidad. After repeatedly grabbing his glove. Like, the knockout happens because he holds inside the cuff of his glove and then uppercuts him as he's trying to run away with his hand down, you know, because it's being pulled away by Johns' fingers. I mean, they could have appealed that, and they should have appealed that. And then the last fight of any real note this weekend was Julian Erosa versus Steven Peterson, which was a sloppy mess. Julian Erosa's last one against, was it Charles Jourdain? I said he was like a young Matt Brown. I loved it. He was like, or an old Matt Brown. He was like a new Matt Brown. He just walked him down, beat him up with body shots, elbows, knees, kicked him from the direction he was circling. It was all great. And then in this one, he tried to do that, and every time that Peterson threw back, Peterson chinned him because, like, Erosa keeps his hands down by his nips and doesn't move his head. Which, you know, Matt Brown didn't have great head movement, but he did always check his opponent's hands. His hands were always going on his opponent's hands, and then he'd turn over an elbow or he'd duck into a clinch or whatever. Erosa, none of that. So he's just standing there, and every time Peterson flashes the jab and throws the overhand after it, the overhand always connects and stuns Erosa. I mean, Erosa really needs to work with, like, a really good Muay Thai crew or someone like that who's going to be able to teach him to get his fucking hands open and on the opponent's hands, because he could be such a force with that pressure and his eye for body shots, his eye for kicks and things. Oh, and he also took up the mantle of Joe Duffy for doing stupid hook kicks when they don't make sense. Joe Duffy used to have, like, the slickest boxing at lightweight, and then he'd go, "I'm going to throw a hook kick," and just accomplish nothing with it, except maybe turn his back. But Erosa got very lucky to get this split decision because Peterson was giving him hell throughout the entire fight. It was a good fun one. Probably should have got fight of the night. Don't think they gave one out in the end. But anyway, not a bad night of fights. Didn't really enjoy the main event that much, but luckily we've got a banger coming up at the weekend. Adesanya versus Whittaker 2. You got some fat lads in the co-main event. You got Jared Cannonier and Derek Brunson. Blonde Brunson versus Thin Cannonier. You got Kyler Phillips coming back. You got Hack Paras versus Bobby Green. Arlovsky's going to fight Sam Slob. Roxanne Modafferi is unretiring. William Knight is trying to prove it's not a coincidence. Moicano versus Hernandez. Yeah, good fights all the way down. So we'll be talking about that on the Boycast, Wednesday, Thursday time. If you want to get in on the extra episodes and articles and support the podcast, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Sam Alvey surpassing BJ Penn's record, bless.